Welcome. I'm Donna Rain Shostak, Chair of the Laguna Woods Water Conservation Committee, and we're here today to talk about water conservation. I'd first like to introduce our guests. We have Dennis Cafferty, General Manager of El Toro Water District, and Lee Goldstein, resident of Laguna Woods, advisor to our Water Conservation Committee, and chair of Laguna Woods Village's 2022 Earth Day celebration, and is willing to take on 2023 as well. So welcome to you, and welcome to those of you in our audience. We're here to talk about water, our present situation, what the future looks like, and what we as residents of Laguna Woods can do to help conserve this valuable resource. Let's begin with Dennis Cafferty of El Toro Water District. What's our current situation, and what does the future look like?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And we've got a few slides we can go through to kind of paint the picture of where we are from a water supply standpoint. We are facing some significant challenges, and I think everybody has heard about a lot of that in the newspapers, on TV, and certainly when we at the district have had a chance to talk about it. When we look at where we get our water from, it really comes from three places. We get water from the State Water Project, which is the engineering marvel that it is, bringing water all the way from Lake Oroville in Northern California all the way to us here in Southern California. And then we also get water from the Colorado River, essentially snow melt from the Rockies through the Colorado River, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, and ultimately through the Colorado River aqueduct into Southern California. Both of those systems are extremely compromised right now, and that's the challenge we face. A good number, especially in South Orange County, of agencies have invested significantly in water supply projects, or what we would call local supplies. Certainly in Central and North Orange County, they have the benefit of relying on the groundwater basin. We don't have access to the groundwater basin in South Orange County. Really, El Toro Water District is the first agency you get to as you move south in the county that does not have groundwater. We don't overlie the basin. We don't have any rights to that water. But we at the district have invested significantly in recycled water and have also continued over really a long period of time investing in water use efficiency practices and encouraging all of our customers to use water as efficiently as we can. In fact, we've kind of moved away from the term conservation, which is sometimes an emergency measure and one that we're really talking about now, to water use efficiency, which is really kind of more in the way of habits. So if we can go to the next slide, we really are now starting to look at some of the conditions we're seeing in both of those sources of supply. And this slide really kind of shows, limited to the state of California, and the picture really tells an interesting tale. This is when they go out and do monitoring of snowpack. And it really is of great concern when you go to monitor snow levels and you're standing on dry ground. And so we have had a good start this year, and you look at the graphs, the snowpack graph shows that we're above average for this time of year. The two precipitation indexes, one, the 8-station index, it's at about, it says 85% of normal. That's actually with recent storms coming up to 93%. On the 5-station index, it's more in Central California, is about at 110% now, down from 120%. So we've had some storms in early December, but I have to point out, last year we had record storms in December, and then January, February, and March was the driest 3 months, that driest January, February, March we'd ever seen. And it just kind of flatlined, and we ended up having a relatively dry year. So while we're off to a relatively encouraging start, in fact, when you look at the actual snow water equivalent for the Sierra Mountains right now, you're seeing numbers like 170 to 220% of normal for this time of year. Again, fantastic start, but we're really hoping it continues. And whether or not we continue to see the kind of La Nina conditions that have resulted in really dry and warmer temperatures through the typical winter season remains to be seen. As we go to the next slide, it really kind of talks about what happened, especially through the last year. Not only have we been through 3 years of drought, not only did we see the 3 driest years that they were projecting on record in that terrible 3-month period, but the other thing that we're seeing now in both State Water Project and Colorado River is the impacts of that kind of accumulated dry conditions. The soils are so dry and so thirsty that what snow we do get, when it does melt, and that snow melt we're looking for and counting on, ends up getting sucked up into the ground rather than running off into the rivers and streams that we depend on. So not only are we seeing less precipitation, but the ability to convey that water from the mountains actually into the State Water Project or into the Colorado River has been severely impacted as well. And that's the other piece of the puzzle on why this has become such a challenging issue. On the next slide, it kind of shows some of the issues we're seeing with, and these pictures are really impactful. You look at Lake Oroville under normal conditions and basically the same spot in the lake when we get down into levels, and right now we're at about 28% of the total capacity of that reservoir. Last year, that was one of the big challenges we faced, is at the start of the year, the reservoir levels were so low that it made it really difficult to recover. And especially Lake Oroville and some of the other California reservoirs are designed not only for water storage, but for flood control. So they have to be at a lower level when we go into the rainy season, but not this low. As we move on to the next slide, it again paints the picture of what's happening in California. And normally we see 3.2 million acre feet of water through the State Water Project. Over the last 3 years, it's been down in the 0.6 million acre feet range. And where it's such a low level, and currently the allocation on the State Water Project is 5% of normal, which has restricted use, especially in areas within Metropolitan Water District that are dependent on State Water Project, because they simply they don't have the infrastructure to get Colorado River water to those areas. They're in an emergency condition. They are cutting water use by as much as 70% in some areas. And so what we're really seeing is how much that emergency is going to translate into the rest of the area as these conditions might continue. Moving on to the next slide, now we talk about Colorado River, and the image on the right kind of shows the way it's all set up. You've got snow melt from the Rockies going to Lake Powell, going to Lake Mead, and ultimately to the Colorado River Aqueduct. Both of those reservoirs are at significantly lower levels now. So as we look at Lake Powell, and we've seen some of these images in the past where you see that kind of bathtub ring and the level that is so significantly depressed, but as you can see that level falling, one of the big issues that we're dealing with now in Colorado River is that level drops to what you see on the graph is the minimum power pool. There's a lot of hydroelectric power generated at the Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell, and they simply cannot allow the level to get below that production level because of the significant impact it has not only on water supply, but on electricity generation. So that limitation is restricting how much water can get released from Lake Powell and go to Lake Mead. And the next slide shows what's happening at Lake Mead. We are seeing a combination of events, and you can see that line as it's continued to drop, and it has now passed both the level 1 and level 2 shortage triggers. And what's happening is, again, significant drought conditions. In reality, the Colorado River Basin has been dealing with drought for 22 years now. But in addition to that, we've had those same runoff issues I mentioned before, so the water's not making it to the river. And then demands went up as Metropolitan Water District had to shift to more supplies on the Colorado River because of the issues on the State Water Project. And then certain crops became more valuable as hay prices went up. Farmers want to benefit from that, and they're planting more alfalfa, so it created more demand. And then on top of that, the federal government was restricting how much water could be released from Lake Powell because of those issues with hydroelectric power generation. So you add all those things together, and now you have significant issues in Lake Mead. That level 1 shortage trigger has already been hit, and so that resulted in significant reductions in water use in several of the basin states. It has not yet impacted California. California has superior water rights as defined by the original Colorado River Compact, but we are now at the level that would result in impacts to California. They do it on a calendar year, so it's not going to impact California in 2023, but we sure seem to be headed to a direction where it is going to impact California as well. So going to the next slide, Metropolitan Water District has invested for years in storage and has done a lot of great things to try and manage and mitigate these types of drought conditions. So they have a lot of water in storage, but it's not all easily accessible. And some of it they have to leave where it is. Some of it's in Lake Mead, and they have to leave it there for a more dire emergency. So it's going to be a combination of having to reduce water use in addition to trying to draw on some of that storage. There was a lot of newspaper articles, even over the last few days, talking about actions Metropolitan Water District took in December. What they essentially did was adopt a resolution that clearly declares an emergency drought condition for the region. and it now is impacting both areas that were dependent on a state water project, as well as a call for agencies that are getting water from the Colorado River to also significantly reduce water use. They are not, to be clear, yet at a point where they've gone into what they call allocations, which results in mandatory conservation. But they've made it very clear that come April of this coming year, if water supply conditions haven't improved, if we don't benefit from a reasonably wet winter, then they may well have to go into allocations that would start in July of 2023 and go all the way through June of 24. So they're not there yet, but they have made it very clear that that is a significant potential depending on how well we can respond to the declared emergency, how well we can minimize or be as efficient as possible with water use, and then what kind of winter we really see. So I wish I had better news. The kind of doom and gloom is part of the world I live in. One of the other issues we're seeing too is as noted on the slide, the federal government has asked for a 2 to 4 million acre-foot cut in use in Colorado River. That's a huge amount of the actual water in that river. And so trying to get to those levels, in addition to trying to manage the reservoir levels in Lake Mead and Lake Powell, as well as deal with a very low allocation of water in a state water project, is a lot of big hurdles when it comes to water supply in the state of California, and certainly here in Southern California and Orange County. So we are working to understand those issues. We're working on a variety of things to try and manage it for the long term, some of which I'm sure we'll talk about here this morning. But it is certainly one of the more difficult sets of conditions that I've experienced in my career to this point.
Thank you, I think,
Right?
for that information. As dire as the situation is becoming, or appears to be becoming, we as residents can do some things to help it. How have we done so far? How has Laguna Woods, on its residential water use side, have some of our measures made a difference?
Absolutely, and I appreciate it, and I applaud the effort. As we look at comparing, and we every month are looking at comparisons of water use throughout our customer base, as well as looking at Laguna Woods Village directly. And the one number that really jumped out, and it's trying to compare residential water use is a little harder on my end because I tend to see the totals. But certainly in third, it's easier to compare because so much of third is recycled water. And when you look at the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year, July through June, to the 2021 to 2022 fiscal year, third's numbers were down about 19%. The overall community water total, inclusive of irrigation, I think was down by about 11%. So I appreciate and applaud that effort. It is something, however, that we're going to, and that's compared to, and let me be clear, that's compared to the 2020-2021 fiscal year. You go back and compare it to even the previous year, those numbers are even higher. So it's been kind of a continued effort to reduce water use in the community, which I think all of the residents should pat themselves on the back for that effort, but it's most certainly something that we need to continue.
Okay, and in that light of continuing it as residents, let's turn to Lee Goldstein, who, as a concerned citizen, has been following our water situation from that perspective of a consumer. As a result of what you've learned, Lee, have you made changes in the way you use water, and what can you share with our residents and our viewers that might help them conserve?
Well, I've definitely made changes in how I think about saving water, which I've tried to put in action every day. And I think that that's probably one of the most important things that I can communicate here today, is that there are some new habits we have to get into about how to use potable water. And so if we think about how we use it in our homes, we can use less water when we brush our teeth or shave by turning off faucets when we're actually doing the activity. We can run full loads in our washing machines. We can run full loads in dishwashers. We can actually wash things more efficiently when we do that, washing plates and pans and things. And some of that probably is better in the dishwasher than in your sink. People are taking shorter showers. There are low flow shower heads that people utilize. And if If you take a 5-minute shower with a low flow water shower head, you save, what, 12.5 gallons of water, which adds up, particularly considering that we probably use, what, about 50 gallons per day, probably per person, roughly in Laguna Woods. We do have some rules about using water outside that actually that is potable water, those spigots that you might have your hoses on for patios and for any plantings that you are watering. We're only watering on Wednesdays and Sundays when you need to, and you can measure the soil water pretty easily as to whether you really need to be doing that. And so largely it's just a question of thinking about it. And I think that a lot of people I know are already thinking about it, and I think we're saving water.
And to that end, we are able, in parts of the village, to actually measure how much residential water is being used. As Third Mutual, fortunately, has landscape water separated out from residential water. And because of that, we do have those numbers. We don't have it for the rest of the village, but it appears from the total figures that Dennis just gave us that we're seeing effects throughout the village. But just in Third alone, we have saved from January of this year through September of this year, we've saved approximately 11 million gallons of water on the potable side in Third Mutual, and if you translate that to United as well, that's quite a bit of water. So it may seem like each of us is only contributing a small amount, but when it adds up, it makes quite a difference. In fact, we also can translate that to saving money. It was very difficult to figure out how much money we saved because July of last year was when we began our big push throughout the village at conserving water on the resident side. And that was when El Toro Water District was forced to raise our rates. So how you figure out what you're saving is difficult since the bill this year isn't significantly different from last year, but would have been had we not cut down on water. What I can share with you is, again, because we can see Third Mutual's residential water use, we also can see what's called Tier 4. That's excessive water use, where the charges per unit of water are approximately 4 times the charges of unit of water in the conservation level, in the lowest level. And our bill in Tier 4 for Third Mutual used to run approximately $15,000 a month. We never see that because we don't get the bill. That bill goes to the mutuals. And right now, we seem to be averaging $1,500 a month in Tiered 4. So that is one way that we can see the kind of difference that changes can make. Yesterday, Leah and I were introduced to a very interesting character. His name, he introduced himself as Walter the Water Waster. And he travels around the village with his conscience, whom he chooses to ignore most of the time. You may see him in your travels. I suspect he's planning on visiting the water conservation meeting and might even visit some of the board meetings and share some of what he does that we hope he stops doing. But I wanted to warn you because he is delightful, but he's delightful in a way that we would rather not see. But let's hear from the people we've got here in the last few minutes that we have. Dennis, what advice would you give to our viewers as we move forward in this unknown territory?
Well, and as we've talked this here today, everybody's continued participation in being as efficient as possible with water use is going to be a critical part of the overall equation. It's not going to be enough by itself to solve this problem. Certainly we are hopeful that we will get better weather in the next, even this year, but it is certainly a matter of hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. I don't know what the next number of years will bring in terms of weather and how well that combination of events that have put us in the situation we're in now will play out. But everybody recognizing the need to be as efficient as possible with water and continue what they've been doing. Because as I've said, I'm very pleased and appreciative of what this community has done But all of our customers need to continue in that. And then the state is going to have to continue to look at additional water supply projects as both storage and supply projects. And you're seeing a lot of that both at the state level and the local level. Every other agency I talk to is considering some variation of new water supply projects, whether it be desalination or the future of recycling water to not just irrigation water, but to potable use, which is something that is not here yet, but the regulations are going to be coming out next year, and there's a lot of agencies that are looking at how to implement that as the potential to augment water supply. So that combined with efficient use of water, we're also going to need to see more efficient use of water statewide in agricultural use. Again, I'm never going to criticize the use of water for agriculture. It produces food that we all depend on. But hopefully as a state, we can also find ways to invest in improving the efficiency of that irrigation that can help save a significant amount of water as well. Roughly 3/4 of the water we use in the state goes for irrigation of some kind. So it's going to take a combination of all of these things to get us through this.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. And Lee, what would you share with our residents, our fellow residents, from what you've learned and seen and where we're going to go?
I think you need to look around your house and look for things that might be, that water that might be leaking. We've heard of a story recently about, I think, somebody who was on the Water Conservation Committee who had a slab leak in their house that used 1,000 gallons of water or something. I spotted a leak outside my house in the last couple of weeks, and while it was recycled water, it was water that was just coming out of a broken pipe that was an irrigation line that shouldn't have been broken and did get fixed because I reported it. And so I think that we need to look for those, look for dripping faucets, check under your sinks, and then just get in the water conservation habit. It's not that hard. I think we can all do it, and I think that we're doing a pretty good job, but we can do it even better without draconian changes to our behavior. So.
Thank you. And as we bring this program to a close, Dennis, do you have any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Sure, and I'll say again, the water use efficiency practices are absolutely a critical part of the puzzle, but there's a lot of things we're going to have to do in this state. And some of the challenges that we face drive the timelines to complete them. So there's going to be necessary water supply projects. There's going to be necessary water storage projects. Some of them are in the works. There's a large reservoir they're talking about building up in Central California called the Sites Reservoir. But it's going to take years, not just of design and construction, but if you think about some of the challenges we face, especially in California with some of the environmental requirements to get any of these projects approved, it can take years, if not decades in some cases, to get some of these projects built and online. That project, the Delta Conveyance Project to improve all of the issues with the Delta up in Northern California, is another example of a project that we need, but it could take 20 or 30 years. And then some of the local water supply projects will come online faster, perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years. But again, they have their own limitations, both in terms of environmental restrictions as well as funding. So to try and get to a point where we have better supply opportunities that will help be a part of the puzzle is things we're all working on, but it's going to take time to get there. And the issues we're dealing with are here now. So the water use efficiency to help us get to a point where we have better options in the future is critically important. And I appreciate everyone's effort in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. And very quickly, in our last minute, Lee, do you have anything you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, I think I've shared that this is a doable thing, that we can all change our habits, whether they don't have to be giant changes in your life at all. If you turn off faucets when you don't need to, when you save water other ways, take shorter showers, use full appliances, use smart appliances. I think that we can all do it, and it's working so far, and we can continue to improve and save water.
Okay, thank you both, and thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. We hope you found this program informative and stimulates you to go out and do some more. And I'd like to leave you with just one thought, and that is, remember, the water you save today is the water we'll need tomorrow.
you.